couple of weeks ago, I rewatched the 1995 film Johnny Mnemonic, and now I can't stop thinking about how it's set in 2021. A unique portrayal of the decade I, and perhaps you, are currently living in, Johnny Mnemonic is a deeply strange film. Look, I happen to think it's about twice as good as Blade Runner, but to critics and audiences at the time of its release, an artistically sound science fiction film, this was not. A critical failure and commercial flop, Johnny Mnemonic is a film that, to this day, has not quite yet carved out for itself cult film status. Starring Keanu Reeves, Johnny Mnemonic is a bit of a comfort film of mine, one I've returned to over and over again as a staple of the cyberpunk genre, ready for me whenever I need a fix. I did not grow up with this film. I watched it for the first time 4 years ago, the year it's set in, when I was 25 years old. Old enough to let it wash over me, to not let nostalgia tinge my opinion of it, while also being at the exact perfect age to not let irony-poisoned opinions held by those both younger and older than me to sour my first viewing. I watched it in the middle of a bit of a Keanu kick, Cyberpunk 2077 and a new Matrix film looming in my mind, as part of a dedicated, self-appointed curriculum on his filmography. I think next to The Matrix, John Wick 2, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, it might be among my favorite of his films. So I want to set the record straight, because I fucking love this movie, and you know what? I want to talk about it. I think it's important, in this moment, that we all be able to look back on something like Johnny Mnemonic, either in retrospect or for the first time, and be able to come to the same general conclusion. That it owns. The tale of a mnemonic courier. People tasked in this futuristic age of digital informational warfare with the job of physically transporting sensitive information from place to place via 160 gigabytes of hot hard drive disk storage fused to their brains. The story of Johnny Mnemonic is one soaked in a low-life meets high-tech groundedness that sets itself apart from its sci-fi contemporaries of the early 90s. While other science fiction films from around this time period feature plots based on rather more distinctly 1950s and 60s conceptualizations of sci-fi, often featuring plots revolving around time-traveling robots or freedom fighters on distant Martian colonies, Johnny Mnemonic instead captures a more modern sensibility, harnessing the fears of a newly neoliberal corporate world brimming with equal amounts of hope and cynicism for the internet age. That period-appropriate incisiveness coming as the result of its screenplay being a self-adaptation by William Gibson. Canadian by trade, yet American by birth, William Gibson is, perhaps, the most important science fiction author of the 1980s. His sprawl trilogy of novels, as well as the excellent collection of short stories Burning Chrome, laying the very foundations of cyberpunk as it's known today. Writing the preface for Burning Chrome, fellow science fiction author Bruce Sterling writes, "The triumph of Gibson's work is their brilliant, self-consistent evocation of a credible future. It is hard to overestimate the difficulty of this effort, which is one that many SF writers have been ducking for years." And that's the thread, the core principle of Gibson's approach to science fiction that has marked the entirety of his artistic output. His works, both in his early foundation laying of the cyberpunk genre, and in his work beyond the scope of the 80s and early 90s as it becomes increasingly obsessed with present-day scenarios, has always possessed an eerily prescient quality, stemming perhaps from Gibson's intimate relationship with the modern, the sociological and political milieu of the world, essentially culture. By the time I came to be writing in the 1980s, cultural models of modernity were starting to lose resolution. The dissatisfactions I brought to writing, the burrs under the saddle of my early method, had to do with some sense of that. Of the modern starting to suffer from bit rot, and from a conviction that science fiction hadn't quite been doing its best job about that. It's that sense of loss, and of bit rot within our culture as we careen towards the end of the millennium, that's so perfectly captured by Gibson's short story, Johnny Mnemonic. I put the shotgun in an Adidas bag and padded it out with 4 pairs of tennis socks. Not my style at all, but that was what I was aiming for. If they think you're crude, go technical. If they think you're technical, go crude. I'm a very technical boy. Thus begins Johnny Mnemonic, first published in Omni magazine in May of 1981. A relatively simple tale, what Johnny Mnemonic lacks in structural complexity, it makes up for in the depth of its texture. Laden with sentences drenched in world building, home to descriptions of tech so far-flung it'll make your central nervous system crawl, Johnny Mnemonic is a dense, 7-layered dip of science fiction jargon, using all its cyberspeak and techno-porn to paint a vision of its near-future dystopian world. But it's the things that Gibson chooses to include from the modern world of the early 1980s that builds its credible futuristic vision. Extrapolating from popular and underground culture of the late 70s and early 1980s, Johnny Mnemonic's world, the world of the sprawl, is one where a mnemonic courier will walk into a cybernetic facial reconstruction clinic named Under the Knife to get his face changed so as to covertly take out his employer, a Nazi-sympathizing effete underworld fixer named Ralphie Face, dodging the facial reconstruction tech's suggestions that he add in epicanthic folds to make him more closely resemble their favorite celebrity, the cheekily named Sony Mao, all the while planning how best to stuff an Adidas bag with an antique firearm, perfect for an under-the-radar hit. Did you get all that? All of this information is delivered within the first few paragraphs of the story, the plot then going on to show us cybernetically altered bodyguards, an impossibly deadly Yakuza assassin disguised as a Japanese tourist complete with Hawaiian shirt, a dolphin we'll get to later, and a dance-off / fight to the death between coolest character of all time, Johnny's newfound bodyguard Molly Millions, and that Yakuza assassin I mentioned on top of an acoustically resonant trampoline suspended hundreds of feet above the city below, known only as the Killing Floor. It's a short, absolutely batshit tale, and it rules. But it's always felt to me a little incomplete. It sketches out an incredibly compelling, dystopian futuristic world, both recognizable and alien to an at-the-time modern audience, but it ends just as soon as it's getting started. Gibson would take the world built here and spin it off into a masterpiece trilogy of novels, leaving Johnny Mnemonic to lie in relative obscurity. But 14 years later, its day would come again. Newly reborn as a feature film starring Keanu Reeves.
So the question remains, how does Johnny Mnemonic, this short, seemingly unadaptable little tale, hold up on film?
Look, I'll just get ahead of it. Johnny Mnemonic is an incredibly dorky film. It's a wash in a kind of mid-90s pop-alt grunginess, but those inclinations are what make it great. Like if Devin Townsend's seminal 1997 alt-metal album Ocean Machine was given celluloid flesh, Johnny Mnemonic is a perfect window into mid-90s culture. An FMV video game of a movie depicting a future where the Atari Jaguar and the Virtual Boy went on to become defining pieces of tech, where white people with dreadlocks stayed cool as hell, where anime never stopped being drawn on physical cells. It's a crunchy, aliased, extremely textured depiction of the future, the clashing of styles between its various factions and characters coming not just from Gibson's sensibilities as a modern oracle and streetwear philosopher, I mean, look at his drip, but from its first-time director, Robert Longo. Formerly an artist, Johnny Mnemonic is Robert Longo's first and only feature film. A photographer and illustrator, his works including a series of charcoal and graphite drawings entitled Men in the Cities, as well as the director of various MTV spots and music videos for bands like REM, Megadeth, and New Order, Longo's work perfectly captures the anxieties and aesthetic sensibilities of the neoliberal world Gen X grew up in. These are gritty, slightly navel-gazy, introspective works, focused on the intersection between the professional and countercultural. Honestly, Robert Longo couldn't have been a more perfect choice to direct an adaptation of Johnny Mnemonic. His music video for thrash metal classic Peace Sells alone being a perfect distillation of the fears and anxieties that created the cyberpunk genre in the first place, his visual flourishes perfectly melding with Gibson's narrative inclinations to create a truly undistilled vision of cyberpunk. The film itself moves at a lightning-quick pace. The writing and editing, coupled with the hypnotic and surrealistic production design, and classic Gibsonian world-building, and fascination with the texture and tangibility of tech, creating an addictingly engrossing world you can envelop yourself in. Its plot extrapolates from and neatly expands upon the content of the short story, a writer's cut of the original work that's more thematically and narratively cogent. growing up out of the page and onto the screen. The plot is simple, laid out in the movie's, alright, yeah, kinda clumsy Star Warsian opening crawl. Second decade of the 21st century. Corporations rule. The world is threatened by a new plague. NAS, Nerve Attenuation Syndrome. Fatal. Epidemic. Its cause and cure unknown. The corporations are opposed by the low-techs, a resistance movement risen from the streets. Hackers, data pirates, guerrilla fighters in the info wars. The corporations defend themselves. They hire the Yakuza, the most powerful of all crime syndicates. They sheathe their data in black ice, lethal viruses waiting to burn the brains of intruders. But the low-techs wait in their strongholds, in the old city cores, like rats in the walls of the world. The most valuable information must sometimes be entrusted to mnemonic couriers, elite agents who smuggle data in wet-wired brain implants. Already, we can see the ways that Gibson has chosen to expand on the original concept of the story, keeping the core intact, adding more flavor to the underdeveloped aspects of the original. And wait, did that say that the world would be plagued by some kind of disease? Oh no!
The story catapults at a breakneck pace, lingering within each scene long enough for us to bask in Gibson's, at the time, unique take on the future, but never so long that we languish in extended exposition. It rips through its plot, offering action set pieces, insane 90s cyber visualizations, artistically blocked and shot sequences, and depictions of the spaces and people that would populate a cyberpunk world in a way that still feels unparalleled. And then the film is just kind of over before you know it in a really great way. I mean, it's 96 minutes long, what we real film heads call a perfect 136er. Look it up.
Yet within that freneticism, there's the occasional stillness. Moments where the film lingers on a dingy street in Newark, or the dreamlike lobby of the presidential hotel in Beijing, courtesy of Longo's artistic inclinations, that highlight the surreal unreality of this future world. The occasional flashes of Johnny's forgotten past, memories he discarded to make space in his head for his cybernetic memory implant, perfectly capture this feeling that, despite its narcissistically realist qualities, this future isn't quite real, or not as real as some imagined past we've seemingly forgotten. But it's only able to capitalize on these qualities, on all that riveting action and stillness, because at its core, and unlike other films within the genre that unjustly receive lots of praise, Johnny Mnemonic understands what it is. It's fundamentally a Saturday morning cartoon of a movie, an adaptation of an extremely cool and silly short story turned into an extremely cool and silly short movie. But it's this quality that's more than likely the source of a lot of the derision the film received. Reviewing the film for the Chicago Sun-Times, Roger Ebert called it one of the great goofy gestures of recent cinema. A movie that doesn't deserve 1 nanosecond of serious analysis, but has a kind of idiotic grandeur that makes you almost forgive it.
And while he's right in that, yeah, it does have an idiotic grandeur, he's wrong to say that that quality alone disqualifies it from a nanosecond of serious analysis. This movie is as serious about having fun as Blade Runner is about boring you to death. This is a movie where Dolph Lundgren is cast as a cyber-fetishistic self-help bodybuilder preacher who cosplays as Jesus Christ and is also an international hitman hired by Takeshi Kitano to kill Johnny, eerily predicting the development of a type of guy, the Christo-fascist alt-right physical fitness male influencer. He's Liver King meets that one dude who wants to live forever by sucking down his son like a go-gurt for Christ. This is a movie, and I'm so happy we're finally here, whose plot climaxes in a techno-CRT Videotrome lair built by the low-techs to house Jones, the only hacker capable of extracting the data Johnny's carrying in his head, who turns out to be an augmented Navy dolphin addicted to heroin. I mean, in the short story, he's addicted to heroin, They got rid of that from the movie for some reason. I mean, I think if audiences in 1995 could have seen this guy smacked out of his mind, maybe they wouldn't have been so harsh on it. This is a movie starring both Ice-T and Henry Rollins. And Henry Rollins' character, I'm fairly certain, was the inspiration for this guy from Cyberpunk 2077. Have I mentioned world cultural icon Takeshi Kitano is in this thing? Udo Kier is in this thing. But if all that isn't enough to convince you that Johnny Mnemonic knows exactly what it's doing, then I give you this.
There's a scene near the middle of the movie where Johnny and Jane are being pursued by the Yakuza and have to figure out where the image passcode that will unlock the data in Johnny's head was sent to. So they break into a warehouse, inexplicably called Crazy Bob's Computer Shop, where Johnny assembles a computer and VR headset out of spare parts, like John Wick might put together a revolver. But the scene isn't over yet. The computer hacker wizardry Johnny pulls off, culminating in a POV sequence as we see what Johnny sees through the VR headset. A vision of the internet in the early part of the 21st century that is so spellbinding, so replete with images and textures and little pieces of UI ephemera it nearly defies words. He places phone calls. He performs VR motion-controlled hand gestures that trigger commands within the computer. He hacks into databases by physically sliding virtual components like in an FMV video game. He interacts with fellow online denizens who manifest in virtual space like this.
If you think this is stupid, we can't be friends.
The final piece of the puzzle here is Keanu Reeves himself. Giving a performance many might call wooden, some might call constipated, and most might just say is dang old bad, it's easy to see Reeves' performance as the titular and career-frequently Johnny as the one indisputably bad quality of the film. But Reeves' casting couldn't be any closer to perfect for this role than if you lifted Mr. Mnemonic himself out of the pages of Omni magazine. Described in the story as a man wearing another's face, cybernetically flesh-altered by the girls at Under the Knife, Caucasoid features slightly twinged by the hints of the girl's adoration for the celebrity Sony Mao, Keanu Reeves could not present any more as the sort of featureless, ethnically ambiguous, everyman of the future if he tried.
But his physical appearance alone doesn't make the performance. Earlier, we talked about how director Robert Longo's most famous work outside of Johnny Mnemonic is the set of charcoal and graphite drawings, Men in the Cities. These massive, imposing renderings of the newly birthed professional managerial class of the mid-1980s. It's here that the cut of Johnny's jib is drawn. Everything from his professional demeanor, to his tone of voice, to the way he treats those around him, his stupid sharp suits and his stilted stick-up-the-ass personality, all being a reflection of the anxieties and tensions that this professional class, the subject of Longo's work, embody. Here's a group of people who, professionally, have succeeded perhaps far beyond the status of their parents and grandparents, at the top of the world at the end of the century, making decent money in an economy that was only just beginning to weaponize against everyone but those at the absolute top, and yet they still feel, for all their success, no better spiritually or emotionally than those in the classes they rose out of. And this feeling, projected 20 years into the future, arrives us at a man like Johnny Mnemonic. A man who, despite his nice suits, his fancy, elite, high-rolling lifestyle, his particular set of skills, his proclivity to stay in his own corner and look out for number one, no complications, still finds himself deep in the shit just like everyone else. He has no idea what the fuck is going on, and he feels like the world, if anything, owes him room service.
I want the club sandwich. I want the cold Mexican beer. I want a $10,000 a night hooker. I want my shirts laundered like they do at the Imperial Hotel in Tokyo.
And Reeves' performance reflects all of this. His own personally distinct Zen-like detachment and immovability as an actor, twisted to highlight Johnny's performative detachment from and superiority over those around him. It's this aspect of Johnny's character, and Reeves' portrayal of him, that lies at the core of who Johnny is as a person, and what makes him the perfect embodiment of the themes and fears that Cyberpunk represents. He's done everything he can and still feels overwhelmed. Still feels like a failure, lashing out at a world he feels has singled him out. Why should carrying this data in his head, the cure for the cyberplague Nas, be his responsibility, his burden to bear, when he never asked for any of this in the first place? He's looked out for number one all his life, but the problem is,
it's not just about you anymore.
if Johnny's going to get rid of this massive weight on his shoulders, he has to realize that not only is it not his to bear exclusively, but that it's his responsibility to help, and in turn be helped by, others.
The anxieties of Cyberpunk are communal. The fears of atomized individuals as they're crushed underneath the cold, impersonal, anti-communal nature of corporate interests. So it's in collective action, and banding together against a common enemy by all types of people within a society, that the boot is removed from their necks. This simple, elemental statement is what Johnny Mnemonic is all about. And it's the clear, straightforward, highly entertaining way it relates this theme that makes it a good movie. It has something to say. It has something to offer. I don't think it deserves the reputation it's gotten, and I recommend you all watch it, now more than ever. But for all its stylistic and narrative qualities, for all the fun I think it is, and for all the ways I think it's a deeper, more artistically considered film than I think a lot of people give it credit for, the thing about Johnny Mnemonic that I can't stop thinking about is this tiny, inconspicuous detail within the scene where Johnny first unwittingly downloads the cure for Nas, the inciting incident of the entire story. After a brain-meltingly intense sequence where the data is copied over into Johnny's head, he tells one of the guys in the room to fax a copy of the image code sequence that will unlock the data from his brain to his client in Newark. In a world where people have cybernetic neural implants, where dolphins can telepathically mindfuck the chrome out of a Jesus freak, where Yakuza hitmen use laser whips to decapitate goons, where the digital world constitutes real, tangible, three-dimensional space, then why is the most cutting-edge, illegal, necessary to the function of this new digital surveillance state world activity, the act of implanting valuable data into the head of a human courier, predicated upon the use of a fax machine?
This train of thought set me reeling. It called into question so much about this movie and brought into focus all the other hindsightedly viewed anachronisms of its world. If Cyberpunk gave us anything, other than 80s pastiche and a sort of punk rock anti-corporate spirit that has lasted, it's the idea that the lights of the future are strung upon the bones of the past. Cybernetically implanted bodyguards scamper down derelict 20th century streets. Men download vast 160 gigabyte sums of information from a trans-dimensional neural net space in rooms out of Architectural Digest circa 1989. Omniscient AI superstructures, built on the collected data of a pharmaceutical company, project themselves onto CRT televisions.
But why? Why did this futuristic vision, casting out 26 years into the future from the year 1995, for all its predictions that did come true, for all its predictions that even to us now seem far-fetched and comically impossible, constrain its worldview so as to include this now extremely antiquated artifact? Why was its net, for however wide, still so shallow? And that's what this video is about. Now, I know this is a little different. I know this isn't a deep dive into why Nero is one of the greatest video game protagonists of all time. But over the past month, I just haven't been able to shake this feeling that the window we use to gaze out at the future is shrinking.
There's something insidious about a video game like F.E.A.R.
Released in 2005, yet set ambiguously in the future, the game puts you in the shoes of the Point Man, a member of the titular First Encounter Assault Recon Team, a group of badass guys and singular gal who work to fight against, well, it's never really clear They're a futuristic SWAT team who fights supernatural criminals in the future. You're hunting down a guy goofily named Paxton Fettel, who's hijacked an army of clones developed by a company called Armacam. Look, it's really not that important. The focus here is on the combat.
F.E.A.R is riveting. Its kinetic Counter-Strike-ish gunplay, still to this day incredible enemy AI, and its stylish and tasteful use of a gimmicky slow-mo mechanic making it one of the greatest first-person shooters of all time. It's almost a sort of proto-Hotline Miami-style action game, where each high-octane enemy encounter is turned by virtue of its simple yet dynamic mechanics and systems into these really engaging violence puzzles for you to solve. These systems also serve to ground you in the setting. In F.E.A.R, you'll explore familiar urban environments, sewers, loading docks, ventilation systems, offices, and various types of underground layers. You'll stalk through these spaces, peeking around corners, checking out angles, scoping out choke points that'll give you a leg up over the replica soldiers and their lifelike tactics. It's tense stuff. The combination of close quarters and the perfectly tuned time to kill, both for yourself and your enemies, creating a harrowingly realistic combat experience.
It's a seminal FPS. It feels really good to play. The enemy AI sure do behave like real people, and yep, they'll flank you or try and flush you out with grenades if you're not careful, but that's not the reason I want to talk about F.E.A.R. The reason I want to talk about F.E.A.R is that for all its future tech and really sick guns, for all its mechanical depth and intense pulse-pounding gameplay, for all its ambitions of being a horror game where horror things actually happen, what scares me the most about F.E.A.R, what has left me lying awake at night after playing it, is that it's set in 2025.
When I was a kid, my mom would sometimes take me and my brother into work with her. She'd do a lot of overtime work on the weekends, her work as a Spanish language localizer at a big company being a job she'd devote a lot of extra time to. So sometimes on a Saturday or a Sunday, we'd go in with her to her office, a to me, megalithic building. It being the weekend, the place would always be eerily vacant. The parking garage we'd enter through a subterranean accessway to floors upon floors of empty desks, uninhabited conference spaces, and desolate break rooms. These spaces filled me with the sense that this is what real life was, that this would be what awaited me beyond childhood. A life inhabiting abandoned, meaningless spaces, doing atomized work in isolation from others, the whole of the professional world a deserted, sunless space. I was surprised to see then that these spaces, ones I've known since childhood, ones I now regularly visit in my adult life, are the setting for a futuristic action horror first-person shooter set in the distant year of 2025. F.E.A.R is a game that posits a future, 20 years down the line from its release, where the only thing that's changed about the world are the weapons we use to kill one another. Regular people work in offices, they leave each other voicemails that paint their lives as indistinguishable from those of an earlier generation living all the way back in 2005. They use chunky Alienware laptops. They buy sodas from vending machines. Everything is all much the same as it ever was. Yet the tools at the disposal of those truly living in the future have grown sharper, more jagged teeth. The future here is only imagined as a state of perpetual warfare, the world itself suffused with a feeling of finality, like as if by 2005 we'd reached a point where we realized that this is what the world is. This is all it can be, a prison for violence, or even the runoff of covert technological development, once the impetus behind many of the prior centuries' advancements in consumer tech and quality of life for the average person has turned only to harmful, toxic detritus, an entire district of a major metropolitan city abandoned due to the environmental and economic effects of growth.
This is the futuristic anti-vision of F.E.A.R. Released 10 years after Johnny Mnemonic, a stark and unsettling view at what a culture could envision as the future. There's a pervasive nihilism here, highlighted even more so by the game's atmosphere, a sort of Lynch meets Verhoeven and they go have lunch with Kurosawa type vibe that results in a shooter ripe with a sense of dread. Coming not from the creepy little girl who jump scares you every so often, or the ferocious enemy AI, or the real, actual ghosts you end up having to gun down, but from knowing that this is a world coming to an end.
It's the horror of living in a world where nothing's changed, where technological advancements exist only to reverberate one cruel, bleak example of human suffering into eternity, where the future is no longer in front of us, waiting to be taken control of, or even fought over, because the future's already here. The future's been here, gestating somewhere inaccessibly deep below the earth.
Is this all we can imagine? As a society, was this all we could credibly believe in? As the Point Man, we search not just after Paxton Fettel and his army of psychically controlled clone soldiers, we also search, like Johnny Mnemonic before us, for a forgotten piece of ourselves. For a missing piece to the puzzle of our tortured reality that might set things right, that might illuminate why things are the way they are, that might offer us a path of salvation into the future. But even when the answer comes, not only does it no longer truly illuminate the past, like it did for Johnny, it shrouds the past in even more darkness, and offers no path towards a better future.
The future did not manifest in flying cars, or mass-market cybernetic implants, or virtualized communal transcendent 3D internet space, but in scores of regular people, working a regular job, in an atemporal, smartly furnished, clean, nearly vacant office for a company that secretly created an army of clones controlled by their shared link to the trauma of a sexually and commercially exploited, developmentally stunted woman. It's as if this was the only future we can credibly believe in, if we could believe in one at all. So, I finished writing the script, I went to record it, and then the news broke that Warner Bros. Games closed down Monolith Studios, as well as Player First Games and Warner Bros. Games San Diego. Allegedly after the failed performance of Multiversus, a game that I think had a really promising launch from the look of it all, and then tanked its own prospects by coming back from an open beta worse than it was before, and Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, a game nobody wanted or asked for. And I don't really know what to say about this. I mean, it's a travesty, and it's indicative of all the things wrong with the gaming industry and with late-stage capitalism at large, that F.E.A.R, a seminal gaming franchise, now exists more or less at the bottom of a trash can, sent to the island of lost IP because some dipshit executive's directive that Warner Bros. Games regain their credibility and swagger. I mean, you know how you regain your credibility and swagger? You let talented creators and studios, sitting on goldmine franchises, make the kind of shit they want to make. This is the future we live in. Everything closing up around us, the people who should be charting a path forward sidelined by whatever upper management idiot thought making the studio who made one of the best single-player open-world action games of a generation spew out games-as-a-service content slop no one, not audiences, not developers, no one cared about. And at the end of the day, the people who pay the price aren't those that call the bad shot, but those forced to pull the trigger. And I really don't know what I have left to say about any of this, other than it fucking sucks. It's disheartening to think that, at the very least 20 years ago, a decently sized company, what would have been considered AAA at the time, could put out a game like F.E.A.R, a perfectly scoped first-person shooter, and turn a profit, make a few sequels, and establish a franchise and legacy that has lasted to this day, and that all of that seemingly just is not enough anymore. What more could you want? It's a fucking video game.
So far, we've been looking at examples of what people in the past thought the future might look like. Lost futures that have grown, over time, more and more cynical about what the future could provide for us. But if this is what the future used to be, then what does it look like now? It's interesting. To me, how prevalent cyberpunk has become within our culture. Cyberpunk video games, cyberpunk TV shows, tabletop RPGs. The genre is seeing the heights of its popularity today for reasons I'm sure we're all aware of. But there's something about this that bothers me. So much of new sci-fi, and I mean sci-fi set in a near future and not stuff like Dune set so far in the future it might as well be fantasy, it feels, to me, extremely anachronistic. Cyberpunk still feels like a deeply 20th century thing to me. Like, yes, it predicted several aspects of our modern, corporately run lives, but at the same time, look, the kinds of characters, the way they rebel against the systems they live within, the tech they use, the synthwave music and bright neon colors, it all just feels old. Like it in some way mirrors our reality, but not because it's casting out into the future from the present, but because the present is in some ways molding itself to emulate a future that never really arrived. These are futures, yes, but they don't really belong to us. One look through the Cyberpunk tag page on Steam showing us a bunch of games that, while, yeah, look really sick, all seemingly have a foot in the future, and the others squarely in an aesthetic past. So then what would a game look like if it was divorced from this need to aesthetically root the future in the past? What would a science fiction story look like if it tried to capture this exact moment we're all living through? Presenting us with a futuristic world that directly addressed our present-day culture, aesthetics, and society, without the need to couch it all on the commercially viable trappings of popular 1980s and 90s ideas of sci-fi. Can the future even begin to escape the past?
I can sense that there is something terrible hidden in our past, and if we remember it, it will destroy us.
I mean, can it? So much of what we're currently living through, a real thorn in the side of my thesis here, is that the present and the future seem like they're being forced to mirror the worst of what lost futures have to offer. Forget living in Cyberpunk, at the very least those guys got to wear cool clothes and fight back in ways that actually mattered. Flying cars and cool VR internet are out, fascist dweebs creating the torment nexus while we all do nothing about it is in. But does it have to be that way? Why are we stuck in this situation where the future can only resemble the worst we can imagine? Is this what the present looks like when the future collapses in on itself?
To talk about NORCO, to try and whittle it down into one cohesive narrative, to try and fit it into the rough thesis of this video and use it to prove a point about the future as it existed around when I was born, how it was presented during my childhood and adolescence, and how it manifests now that me and my generation find ourselves well into adulthood, well, that would only do its breadth of storytelling a disservice. Set in the greater New Orleans area, among the river parishes and fence-lined communities of southeastern Louisiana, NORCO is a game about collapse. You take the role of Kay, a young woman who has returned to her hometown of NORCO, Louisiana after receiving a message from her estranged brother Blake telling her that their mother, Catherine, who is suffering from cancer, has passed away. The plot goes from there. Intentional convolution and deeply paranoid themes running their course through a 6-ish hour science fiction point-and-click adventure game with so many twists and turns and surprises, I would deeply hate to spoil it for anyone who still hasn't played it. If these visuals entice you, if you're a fan of old-school LucasArts or Japanese-style adventure games like Snatcher, if hearing me say the words cyber-gnostic southern gothic shitpost doesn't make you immediately unsubscribe from my channel, then go play NORCO.
But the thing that interests me the most about NORCO is that I don't want to admit when it's supposed to take place.
It's telling that something as simple as the exact year NORCO takes place in is as obscure as some of its deeper themes and references. There's a scene where, upon meeting one of your mother's friends, an old man named Duck, enfeebled after years spent living in the fence-lined community of Dimes, literally on the other side of the fence from the enormous, environmentally toxic Shield oil refinery. Duck himself an activist and co-conspirator of your mother's in a project or plot related to a mystery object spotted over Lake Pontchartrain. You're given leave to comb through his office as you search for a clue that might help lead you to your missing brother, Blake. Here we can interact with receipts, newspaper clippings, books, and other pieces of errata relating to his work and research on the dangers posed by the refinery visible from the windows of his home office, finally granting us a look at around what year the apocalyptic events of the game might be taking place in, only to be given dates like YX10, YX2B, or YX1S. What do we do with this information?
Is this the present, set in an alternate timeline where the ecological collapse is destined to hit the Gulf Coast? Disasters that have already and will continue to happen are occurring, where the world is much the same as our own now? I mean, it has to be. We'll look at the fashion and the buildings and their cell phones, but then there's the inclusion of characters like Million, an AI-powered android your mother took in when you were just a child, implying that, in this setting, at least 20 years ago, the world had progressed technologically far enough for private corporations developing and employing humanoid androids to just be a thing. We want this to be the future. It has to be the future, because if it's not, if this is what we're living through now, then what are we supposed to even do? How do we square that with our expectations of reality, unless we admit that this world in landslide, this future where everything is the same, where nothing new is created except in ways that further perpetuate that decline, this is the future. The actual temporal locus of these events, for all intents and purposes irrelevant, rendered as an incomprehensible string of letters and numbers to drive home the fact that 20 years or 20 seconds, it doesn't matter. The future's already here, and it's here to stay.
The people of this world, those that inhabit the game's many factions, each have found different ways to relate to this new state of atemporality. But all anyone can do is recoil in horror. Where once, in sci-fi, we used to see wars between upper and lower classes, the corporations versus the low-techs, what we're shown in NORCO are upper and lower classes so factionalized, so jaded, so delusional over the dissolving state of the present, they can only manage to wage war against themselves. Take, for instance, the most prevalent faction in NORCO's greater New Orleans, the Garretts. A group of young men have taken over the local abandoned shopping mall. You go to meet them on a quest to recover from somewhere inside the mall, and are met by these identically dressed, bowl-cut wearing losers, all of them named Garrett. These are the Garretts, a messianic technocratic doomsday cult grown online around the teachings of a man calling himself Kenner John. Teachings and belief systems codified in their foundational text, the Apocryphon of John. The Apocryphon of John is a 2nd century text attributed to John the Apostle, the Apocryphon of John being one of the foundational texts of Gnostic Christianity. A heretical sect of Christianity, the Gnostics believe, in a nutshell, that the material universe is a prison constructed not by a benevolent all-knowing entity, but by a vengeful, sadistic being masquerading as God, known as the Demiurge. But our souls, claim the Gnostics, descend from and have a connection to the truly divine, merely trapped within a material prison, and it's up to us to acknowledge our immaterial divinity and imprisonment within the material world, see the Demiurge for what it truly is, and escape from this confinement in principle now, and certainly after death.
Listen, I'm not a religious scholar, I probably got some of that wrong, so if you want a deep dive into Gnosticism, then I highly recommend you go check out Dr. Justin Sledge over on his YouTube channel, Esoterica. His video on the Apocryphon of John, an excellent primer on the subject.
Here in NORCO, however, the book's name, content, and the identity of John the Apostle are co-opted by Greater New Orleans' very own Kenner John. The Apocryphon of John, as seen in NORCO, is a dizzying account of how young men are radicalized online. The 3 volumes of the text needing to be found scavenger hunt style by would-be Garrett initiates using an app called the Apocryphon, an augmented reality viewer that allows the user to discover the virtual sculptures that Kenner John has hidden throughout Greater New Orleans. The readings go a little something like this.
First reading from the Apocryphon of Kenner John. Early years you spend inside, TV on, dad blaring the games. Says he keeps Christ in his heart, but it's a lie. Kenner is the only place on earth. Nowhere to go, no one to hang out with. Your flesh is alien. The house is a prison. Only escape is through fiber lines. Someone in the forums posts a flyer for a show. Somewhere to meet people, something to do. Whatever. You borrow your dad's car and go. Step into Saint Somewheres and you immediately know. These aren't your people, Garrett. You make a few jokes. Someone calls you a Nazi. You throw the first punch. Things spiral out of control. You're outside bleeding, pushing someone's face into a trash can full of Go Cups and beer bottles. The scum are screaming at you to stop, but you don't. Someone knocks you over the head with a floor jack. You fall to the ground. They think you're dead. You're unconscious for 11 days. You wake up with a slouched mouth on your left side, determined to ruin everyone's life. You watch the forums closer now. You call the cops on the next show, and the next show, and the next show. You get the place shut down for a while. You didn't let up. Good job. Fuck the scum.
The text of the Apocryphon is a narrative, outlining the process by which a young man becomes a Garrett. It's a process of hyper-niche radicalization, atomized individuals living within a collapsing suburban sprawl clinging desperately to something, anything, that will confirm their beliefs, provide a reason for their suffering, and then present a way out. The Garretts know, intuitively, that the future has disappeared, and they believe that power, and power alone, is what will make a future for them. The Garretts, in their outpost at Promenade Mall, are plotting something. Some unknown force has revealed itself to Kenner John, and with his newly gained knowledge, he and his army of little dorks are constructing something out in the bayou, a way to escape Kenner, to leave New Orleans, this country, this collapsing shell of a world, this bleak, hopeless, interminable future, this Gnostic prison behind. They're building a rocket to Mars on an eroding island out in the middle of the swamp. But I won't spoil what happens to Kenner John and his little Garretts, or whether their rocket is real or a LARP dreamed up to give a bunch of terminally online weirdos hope for a brighter future and keep them all in line. What's important to me, though, is why Gnosticism? Why write your techno-fetishistic doomer right-wing accelerationist cult to be based on the Gnostic writings of John the Apostle? What does any of this have to do with the future? The future present in NORCO is one that is flattened out. The fabric of our reality stretched so thin it's beginning to tear apart at the seams. The Gnostic idea that materiality is a prison, that the world is in a sense evil, comes to bear here. If the future was once a vestige of hope, a divine, unknowable spark waiting to be harnessed, then NORCO presents us a world where the spark is gone. Everyone in the world is searching for a way to escape their current situation, to escape this place, this shrinking prison we call reality. Perhaps, as the dimension of time flattens out and closes up around us, so too does the very geography of the world we live in. The present, more and more, is an eroding island in a swamp. But the thing about the Garretts is that they're wrong.
To live your whole life following strongmen, to be complacent and thinking that happiness and a place in the world is guaranteed to you if you only follow a strict, codified set of rules, and then to have the happiness not come, it's devastating. We live in a future, in a present, sometimes too complex and difficult to apprehend. Its nature unknowable, hidden, and deeply personal. So we turn towards demiurges. Kenner John, Papa, Thomas and Catherine St. Clair, all deluded opportunists wresting control of our own futures from us. Our salvation isn't going to come from some imagined mythic past or on some utopian colony on Mars. It's here right now, in ourselves, and in our relationship to those around us. And no story in NORCO drives this home more than Dallas's.
Dallas is a gig worker who joins your party as a companion on a quest for to recover the. He's cold and distant, just doing a job, not interested in forming a connection with you or even with the bizarre Lovecraftian situation you find yourselves in. But all that goes away when, in an optional scene, we can travel with Dallas to his home and discover why he's doing what he does. The lights are on inside. Christmas lights strung up decorating the exterior of a small house in Holly Grove, New Orleans, inherited by Dallas from his father. The house is flooded many times, but he still loves it. We go inside, and there's only one room to explore, a warm and inviting living room. On the couch lies a boy on a tablet, on the carpet a young woman studying. The TV is on but muted. Plates full of pizza lie on the floor amidst soda cans, an open laptop, a pile of textbooks. This is Dallas's family, his daughter Martha and grandson Austin, and in interacting with them, in seeing the ways they treat him, teasing him and genuinely showing affection for this man we've only known to be cold and professional, we see the real Dallas. And he's just a guy with a family he loves and wants to take care of, and in turn, a family that takes care of him. This is what's important to him. And then you notice there's a Christmas tree, bright and shiny, in the corner of the room, a single present sitting underneath. It's Dallas's birthday. You inspect the gift, Dallas's gift, and despite his refusals, his daughter and grandson make him open his present. It's a little Christmas tie. Austin picked it out. They got it at the dollar store. It says, "Joy." He wears it for the rest of the game. It's this little side objective that shows us the steps we can take to begin reclaiming our future. It's telling that at the end of Johnny Mnemonic, the thing that Johnny regains that allows him to free the information stored in his mind and save the world from the evils of Pharmacom, are the memories he gave up in order to exist effectively within this cyberpunk future. Memories that plague him, indeterminable flashes of gauzy information, revealed to be memories of a childhood birthday party, of his friends, of his family. Soon after, Johnny and his newfound family of badass cybernetically augmented bodyguard, resistance fighter, and psychic dolphin gaze out at the city as the Pharmacom headquarters bursts into flames. By the mid-2000s, however, this vision of triumph, of a sense of hope in the face of cynicism, was like the shores upon which stand our visions of the future, being slowly eroded away, creating a world of anti-progress, where not only is the idea that average people will have access to advanced technology laughable, but so is the idea that we could do anything to stop the powerful from exerting any sense of control over our lives. If the past, in F.E.A.R, harbors anything, it's no longer a path towards a better future, but truths so horrible they now haunt the present and all possible futures, signaling that not only were our best days never behind us, but that they'll never even arrive. The future was shrinking.
I went into this video wanting to figure out why it was that our collective sense of the future is dwindling. And yeah, I did the reading. I read Capitalist Realism, I read Ghosts of My Life, but while I could spend time talking about how the root of all this stems from our living in a post-Fordist, neoliberal society, where the proliferation of a kind of business ontology has created a world where everything is run as a business, and everything being run as a business, coupled with like capitalism's insistence on prioritizing growth at all costs over producing products that actually, I don't know, you know, work or are helpful to anyone, creates a situation where visionary ideas of the future, or even new ideas at all, in popular art are sidelined over constantly reiterating the same tried and true commercially viable aesthetics and formulas, leaving us stranded in a world eternally stuck in the 20th century, endlessly rehashing 20th century culture, aesthetics, and political movements. The world now turned into a spiritual and material quagmire that this isn't helpful. I could be here all day. I could be here forever, looking at examples, pinpointing all the different science, culture, and geography and time are just collapsing in on themselves all around us, but what good would it do? And what's anyone like you, or like me, supposed to do about any of this? If these two games and a kind of bad but awesome movie have shown us anything, beyond just popular depictions of modernist science fiction as it's existed throughout my life, beyond examples used to show how the future really has closed down around us, of how modern life is suffering from bit rot, it's that while, yeah, the cynical predictions of F.E.A.R did in some ways come true, the world is stuck in an interminable present while various factions and actors fight over who gets control of what little future we have left. What I found within these stories are people rediscovering, like Johnny, that the future is only shrinking because we're told it has to. We don't have to listen. There are people counting on us, not listening. Maybe you've forgotten who they are, maybe you've lost touch, maybe there's something you're running away from. Bridges can get burned. Life can and should sometimes drive us away from people who actively harm us, but what about everyone else? There's one more story from NORCO, one I can't stop thinking about, that I didn't know how to fit into this script without just spoiling some of the plot for you all, but I think it's worth listening to.
Towards the middle of the game, while you're trying to get into the Promenade Mall by hunting down the A.R. glyphs hidden around the city, you run across a house in a suburban subdivision with a 4-door mid-sized SUV parked out front, the garage door left open, sounds of a television coming from inside. So you sneak inside to find an average garage full of junk and tools and stuff in storage. Amidst it all, a middle-aged man sat on a red folding chair watching a football game on TV. You can either announce your presence or stand there as commercials play, but eventually he notices that you're there and, startled by your presence, asks what the hell you're in his garage for. He asks if this is about Bruce. Playing along, you say yes, and learn that this man's son, Bruce, has become a Garrett, estranged from his father who we never quite got along with, his father now desperate to see his son, just wanting to let him know that he can come home. He can't focus. He just wishes he'd call. He started looking through the house, looking for his son's old things, just wanting something, anything, to remember him by. You ask him what he would tell his son if he ever came back, and he snaps back, hell, I don't know, get some sense. But that's not quite it. He takes a second to think, and then says, you record him saying that into your phone, Bruce asking that if you see him, would you please tell him what he said? Will you please tell him he can come back home? I was determined to find Bruce, this new side objective feeling like it would lead to a fun, heartwarming scene where you tell a Garrett he can go home, that his father loves him, that he doesn't have to keep engaging in this stupid bullshit to make his life worthwhile, but over the course of the game's final few hours, I never found Bruce. The end of the game comes, and you find yourself at a small island in the middle of the bayous outside New Orleans, where the Garretts have taken your brother Blake and the corpse of your mother who's been mysteriously exhumed from her grave, stashing them somewhere inside the massive rocket ship it turns out they've actually built. Hundreds have shown up to see what's going on. The news of these alt-right teenage dirtbags having built an actual rocket ship spreading like wildfire. Everyone's watching, waiting for them to blow themselves up. I look everywhere for Bruce, desperate to send him home, to tell him it's going to be okay, but again, I can't find him. I go inside the rocket thinking I'll find him there, but the game has other plans. I'm locked into the ending now. An ending that culminates in a hallucinatory RPG boss rush, the death of one of my favorite party members in any game ever, a conversation with a dead woman, and a trip through the memory of a flooded house so good I will not talk about them. And then, the final confrontation in the cockpit of the rocket between yourself and this mysterious, bejeweled clown freak named Papa, revealed to have been the one who kidnapped your brother and exhumed your mother. But there's nothing you can do. He strapped your mom and brother to thrones inside of the cockpit, and he wants you to take your seat alongside them. I search my inventory, I exhaust my dialogue options, I leave the scene only to discover I'm now trapped inside the rocket. There's nothing I can do to save my brother, to lay my mother to rest, to stop this idiot with his finger on the launch button. So I take a seat. He launches the rocket, we all die. End of story.
I sit there, baffled. What was it all for? All this time spent carefully building up these intricate themes of referencing obscure Christian sects and showing me and getting me to think about the future and environmental collapse and radicalization. What was it all for nothing? Is this what we're doing? Are we all on this rocket with no way out? With no way to save the things we care about, with nothing to do but to just sit down and shut up as a man who looks like this gets to have the final say.
But then I remembered something. When Papa gave the command to launch the rocket, he's talking to a Garrett named Bruce. I let the credits play, I reload my save, we're going to do this right. I'm back at the island, pre-launch, scouring the scene for Bruce, turning over every stone, speaking to every NPC, running my cursor over every square pixel of space, until finally, I find him. Locked up in a storage container I somehow, in the rush to get aboard the rocket, missed. Bruce is holed up inside, indignant that you've busted into his space, interrupting his super important job of running ground control for the rocket launch. He's drunk and irritated, and he wants to be left alone so he can focus, so he can for once just get something right. He slams the door shut. You blast the door with your fists. You have something to show him if he'll just shut up and listen. He opens up, screams at you to stop knocking, his hangover is killing him and he has to focus, but now the prompt for showing him the voice memo appears. You open your phone, scroll to the right voice memo, and play him his father's message. He can't believe it. He wonders why his dad couldn't just tell him himself. LeBlanc, best party member in any video game, chimes in saying that telling someone how you really feel, it's hard sometimes. He goes home. The ending of the game plays out the same, except this time, you have time to save your family, to jump from the rocket into the relative safety of the bayou before the rocket launches with just Papa and the Garretts inside. They blow themselves up and leave you and your family in peace.
And I think that's the whole point of NORCO. The reason why it fits at the end of this rambly, thesis-less video. I sure hope this performs as well as a video gushing about one of the most celebrated games of all time. But it was important for me to make this, because the ending of NORCO, it touched me. So much of the world we live in now, this totally based and deep-fried culture we inhabit, feels every day more and more hopeless. There's about 15 different assholes shouting about how they're gonna launch a rocket, but at the end of the day, they're not the ones with the finger on the launch button. We are. There's so much damage that's already been done. So much of our future that's closed down around us. So much of our own imagination as to what the future can even be that we've just given up on. How can we imagine flying cars and transcendent communal cyberspace and dolphins with brain implants when the ground beneath our feet is shrinking? We never think things will get worse, but when they do, we don't think there's any other way it can be. The answer, then, the way to unstick the future from this snare, is in returning. Not to some idealized vision of the past, repeating old cycles, shit that has nothing to do with you or the world you live in or the people around you. It's in returning to the things and people that matter. Somewhere along the way, we did lose sight of things. We locked into an idea of a future that was myopic and cynical and purely utilitarian, and like Johnny, we traded our memories of who we are and who really cares for us up in exchange for the promise of a seat at the big kids' table. But it was all a lie, a distraction, a willing ticket into a prison constructed by something angry and jealous of the one thing we had that they did not. These are all stories, of course, but why these stories at these times? What is it about the world around us that would make us imagine a future where fax machines are still high-tech? Or where the future looks like an office park in 2005 haunted by cloned soldiers? Or where the future is just a heightened spiritual present? There's something wrong with the way we've been made to look forward. A smallness to the way we've been made to relate to the world around us. You can feel it, can't you? But I keep thinking back to Bruce. Finger on the trigger, the future waiting to be shot into the skies above New Orleans, never to reach the stars, and how a call back home stops him from dooming a bunch of strangers to their deaths. For all our grasping, for all our searching for truths or enemies or something to make us feel like this future we have to live in was worth it all, the truth is, the answers never were in front of us. They were deep inside. And no matter what they want you to believe, no matter what horrible truth you've been convinced might be waiting for you, I promise that it's not as bad as it might seem.
Hey, I wanted to take a second and thank you for watching if you made it this far. This video is my largest yet, and it took an amount of work I really wasn't ready for, but I'm glad I took it on. Next time we're going to be looking at something just a little bit more straightforward, but I hope what I talked about here resonated with you in some way. Until next time, bye.